The night was unusually quiet, a dangerous kind of quiet that warned of unseen eyes. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant promise of rain. Cara Blake crept through the underbrush, each step deliberate, each breath held until she felt her lungs might burst. Her heart pounded in her chest, the only sound she could hear aside from the crunch of dead leaves beneath her boots. Keep moving. She repeated it like a prayer, each step taking her farther from the life she refused to accept. Behind her, the towering stone walls of the Crimson Moon Pack's compound loomed like a shadow of her past. The fortress, built into the rugged cliffs of Shadow Ridge, was more prison than home. And tonight, Cara was breaking free. She reached the tree line, pausing to glance back one last time. The distant torchlights flickered, guards patrolling with the laziness of those who believed no one would dare escape. Cara's pulse quickened. Fools. They underestimated her. They always had. The memory of that morning still burned like silver poison in her veins. The binding ceremony was supposed to be a day of celebration. For her, it was a sentence. She could still hear the chants, the echoing voices of the elders reciting vows she never agreed to. Alpha Marcus Thorne had stood beside her, a wolf cloaked in the skin of a man, his eyes like two chips of ice. "You will be mine, Cara," he had whispered, his voice laced with possession. "An Omega's duty is to serve her Alpha." His hand on her wrist had felt like a shackle, the mark of ownership already searing into her skin. She had looked into his eyes and seen her future, a gilded cage, stripped of will, voice, and hope. Not anymore. A rustle in the bushes pulled her back to the present. Cara froze, every muscle coiled tight. She listened, straining to hear past the rush of blood in her ears. A twig snapped to her left. She turned, eyes narrowing, claws extending ever so slightly. Wolf. The scent hit her before she saw him. Axel, Marcus's enforcer. His presence was an extension of Marcus's will, a shadow that moved through the night, deadly and loyal. He stepped into the moonlight, silver hair glinting like a blade. "Cara." His voice was low, almost gentle. "You know this won't work. Come back and maybe the Alpha will show mercy." "Mercy?" she laughed, a bitter sound. "From Marcus? We both know that's a lie." Axel's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Don't make me do this." Cara didn't answer. She lunged. The impact knocked Axel back, surprise flashing in his eyes as they tumbled to the forest floor. She raked her claws across his shoulder, drawing blood, but he was stronger, faster. He pinned her beneath him, his weight pressing her into the dirt. "Stop," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You can't win." "I don't need to win," she spat, struggling beneath him. "I just need to get away." She twisted, driving her knee into his side. He grunted, the grip on her wrists loosening. She didn't hesitate. A quick roll, a burst of strength fueled by desperation, and she was free. She ran, the forest a blur around her, branches tearing at her clothes and skin. Behind her, Axel's voice echoed through the trees. "Cara!" She didn't stop, couldn't. The scent of pine grew stronger, mingled with something else, something wild. It wrapped around her senses, drawing her forward. Freedom. Or danger. At this point, she couldn't tell the difference. She crossed the boundary without realizing it. One moment, she was in familiar woods. The next, everything shifted. The air grew colder, the scent sharper. Silver Ridge territory. The stories about Lucian Blackwood, Alpha of Silver Ridge, were the kind whispered around fires. He was ruthless, they said. An outcast who had carved his pack from nothing but blood and bone. His territory was a refuge for the desperate, but at a cost. Cara stumbled to a stop, chest heaving. She could feel eyes on her, unseen wolves watching from the shadows. She called, her voice steady despite the tremble in her limbs. "Let me pass." Silence stretched. Then, a figure stepped into view. Lucian. The man who stepped out of the shadows was taller than Cara had imagined. His presence seemed to reshape the forest, each step deliberate, each breath commanding. Lucian Blackwood. His name alone sent shivers through packs across the region, a whispered legend of power and unyielding rule. His eyes, a piercing shade of stormy gray, locked onto hers. They weren't cold like Marcus's, nor did they carry the weight of expectation. Instead, they seemed to peel back layers, seeking something hidden deep within her. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the earth beneath their feet. "Cara." She forced the word out, her throat dry. "I seek refuge." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze flicked to the shadows behind her, and she knew he was aware of Axel's pursuit. His nostrils flared slightly, catching the scent of blood and desperation. "You're from the Crimson Moon Pack." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Lucian's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to grow heavier. "And you think you can simply walk into my territory and ask for protection?" "I don't have a choice," she shot back, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to be free." His eyes narrowed. "Freedom has a price, Omega." She bristled at the term. It was a reminder of everything she'd fought to escape. "I'm not just an Omega." A flicker of something, curiosity maybe, crossed his face. "Prove it." Before she could respond, a low growl echoed from the shadows. Wolves, their eyes glowing like embers, emerged from the trees. Lucian's pack. They moved with lethal grace, their presence a silent threat. Lucian raised a hand and the wolves stilled. "You claim to be more than your rank. Show me." Cara's heart pounded. She knew what he was at. A display of strength, of will. She had spent years hiding her true nature, suppressing the power that simmered beneath her skin. But now there was no room for restraint. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes. When she opened them, her vision sharpened, the world becoming a tapestry of scent and sound. Her bones shifted, muscles stretching and reforming. It wasn't a full transformation. She didn't have the strength for that yet, but claws extended from her fingertips, her senses heightening. Lucian's eyes glimmered with approval. "Good." He moved, fast as lightning. She barely had time to react before he was on her, testing her reflexes. She dodged his strike, countering with a swipe of her claws. He blocked effortlessly, a predator toying with his prey. "Faster," he commanded. She pushed harder, adrenaline flooding her veins. Each movement was a dance of survival, instinct guiding her. Lucian was relentless, but she held her ground, refusing to yield. Finally, he stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You have spirit, but spirit alone won't save you here. I'm not looking to be saved." The words were out before she could stop them, defiance lacing every syllable. A slow, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "Then perhaps you'll survive." Lucian led her deeper into his territory, the forest giving way to a hidden village nestled in a valley. The Silver Ridge Pack's compound was nothing like the Crimson Moon's fortress. It was raw, untamed, blending seamlessly with the wilderness. Wolves moved through the shadows, their eyes following her every step. "This is the sanctuary you seek," Lucian said, his voice low. "But understand this, in my pack, everyone earns their place. I'm not afraid of hard work." He stopped, turning to face her. "Good, because weakness is not tolerated here. If you fall, no one will catch you." Cara met his gaze, her chin lifting. "I won't fall." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of approval. "We'll see." That night, Cara lay in a small cabin at the edge of the village. The room was simple, bare walls, a rough-hewn bed, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. But hope was fragile. The past clawed at her, memories of Marcus's cruelty, the weight of expectation, the suffocating sense of being trapped. She had spent her life being told what she was, an Omega, a pawn, a prize to be claimed. But here, in this wild place, she felt the stirrings of something more. She closed her eyes, the scent of pine and earth grounding her. "I will not be a prisoner again." A sound outside her window made her sit up, heart pounding. Footsteps, quiet, deliberate. She tensed, ready to defend herself. But when the door opened, it was Lucian. He stood in the doorway, his eyes shadowed. "Trouble follows you, Cara." She didn't flinch. "I know." He stepped inside, his presence filling the small room. "Axel won't stop. Marcus won't stop. You've brought a war to my doorstep." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't ask for this." "No." his voice softened. "But it's here, and now we have to decide how it ends." The room seemed smaller with Lucian standing in it, his presence like a storm cloud rolling through. Cara's muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at her to stay ready. Lucian's eyes, shadowed but intense, locked onto hers, reading the fear she tried to hide. "Why did you run from Marcus?" His voice was low, steady, but there was a hint of curiosity behind the authority. Cara's jaw tightened. She didn't want to relive it, didn't want to expose the raw wounds Marcus had left on her soul. But she knew Lucian wouldn't let her avoid the truth. He needed to understand why she was here, why she was worth the risk. "He was going to claim me," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "To him, I was just a possession, a way to strengthen his power. I refused to be used." Lucian's eyes darkened, a flicker of something dangerous passing through them. "You think my pack is any different?" Cara stiffened. "I don't know. But I had to take that chance." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then Lucian nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you'll prove your worth." He turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. Cara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Tomorrow. The word echoed in her mind. She knew it wasn't a promise of safety, it was a test, and she had no choice but to pass. The first light of dawn found Cara standing in the center of the Silver Ridge training grounds, a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and pine needles. Wolves gathered around the edges, watching, waiting. Lucian stood at the front, his gaze unwavering. Beside him was a tall woman with dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, her eyes sharp and assessing. Cara had seen that look before, the look of someone ready to pounce on weakness. "This is Rhea," Lucian said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "She's one of our strongest warriors. She'll test you." Rhea stepped forward, her movements fluid and predatory. "Let's see what you're made of, Runaway." Cara braced herself, muscles coiling. Rhea lunged without warning, a blur of speed and strength. Cara barely dodged the first strike, rolling to the side. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. Rhea didn't pause. She was on Cara again, each attack faster, more brutal. Cara blocked, countered, but she was losing ground. Pain flared in her ribs as Rhea landed a solid blow, knocking the wind out of her. "Is this all you've got?" Rhea taunted, circling like a predator. "No wonder you ran." The words ignited something deep inside Cara. Anger, determination. She wasn't going to lose. Not here, not now. She steadied her breathing, focusing, waiting. When Rhea attacked again, Cara was ready. She moved with a speed she didn't know she possessed, ducking under Rhea's strike and landing a blow of her own. Rhea staggered back, surprise flashing in her eyes. The watching wolves murmured, the tension thickening. Cara didn't let up. She pressed forward, each movement fueled by the fire inside her. She wasn't just fighting Rhea, she was fighting every chain Marcus had tried to put on her. Finally, Rhea fell back, panting, a grudging respect in her eyes. She nodded. "Not bad." Lucian stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. "You've proven you can fight, but strength isn't enough here." Cara met his eyes, chest heaving. "What else do you need?" "Loyalty," he said simply. "To this pack. To me." The words echoed in Cara's mind as she followed Lucian back to the main compound. Loyalty. It was a foreign concept to her. She had spent so long fighting for her own survival, trusting no one. Lucian led her to a small cabin near the edge of the village. It was simple, but it felt safe. For now. "This will be your home," he said, turning to face her. "You'll train with the others. Prove yourself. If you survive, you'll be one of us." Cara nodded, her mind racing. "And if I don't?" Lucian's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Then you won't need to worry about Marcus anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the quiet cabin. Cara sank onto the bed, the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. She had escaped one prison only to find herself in another. Different, but just as dangerous. Days turned into weeks. Cara trained with the pack, pushing herself harder than she ever had before, Rhea was relentless, her sharp eyes always watching, always judging. But Cara didn't break. She couldn't. She began to learn the rhythms of the pack, the unspoken rules, the bonds that tied them together. It was nothing like the Crimson Moon. There was strength here, but also unity. They fought for each other, protected each other, but trust didn't come easily. Not for Cara. One night, as she sat by the fire, Lucian approached, his presence like a shadow. He didn't speak, just watched the flames. "Why did you take me in?" Cara asked, breaking the silence. Lucian's eyes flicked to hers. "Because I see something in you. Strength, defiance. But those things can destroy, or they can build." Cara swallowed, the weight of his words settling deep. "And what do you want from me?" "Loyalty," he said again. "The kind that can't be broken." She looked away, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "I don't know if I can give that." "Then you'll have to decide, because Marcus won't stop. And when he comes, this pack will stand between you and him." Cara's breath caught. "Why?" Lucian's gaze held hers, intense, unyielding. "Because you're one of us now." The days at Silver Ridge blurred into one another, each sunrise marked by grueling training sessions and nights filled with restless dreams. The forest that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a labyrinth. Every path led to a trial, a lesson, or a confrontation. The pack watched her constantly, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Cara couldn't blame them. An outsider from a rival pack, an Omega who had dared to defy an Alpha, it was a dangerous combination. But she didn't care about their judgments. She was here for one reason: survival. The air was sharp with the scent of rain as Cara stood at the edge of the training ground. Today's challenge was different, more dangerous. A hunt through the forest. Lucian had made it clear this wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about strategy, instincts, and the ability to survive in the wild. Lucian stood before the gathered pack, his presence commanding. "The rules are simple," he said, his voice carrying through the clearing. "You'll be paired with a partner. The goal is to track and bring down the stag. The first team to succeed earns the respect of the pack. Fail and you'll answer to me." Cara's heart pounded. She glanced around, wondering who her partner would be. Rhea? One of the betas? Lucian's eyes found hers. "You'll be with me." A murmur rippled through the pack. She could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions. Why her? Why would the Alpha partner with the outsider? Cara didn't have time to wonder. Lucian turned and walked into the forest, and she followed, the silence between them thick with tension. The forest was dense, the canopy overhead filtering the light into dappled shadows. Lucian moved like a predator, every step deliberate, every movement silent. Cara did her best to keep up, her senses straining for any sign of their quarry. "Why are you really here?" Lucian's voice was low, almost a whisper. Cara hesitated. "I told you, I'm running from Marcus. There's more to it than that." He glanced at her, his eyes sharp. "You're not just running from him, you're running from something inside you." She stiffened. "You don't know me. I know enough." He stopped, turning to face her. "I see the way you fight. You're holding back. Why?" Cara swallowed hard, memories flashing like lightning. Marcus's voice, his cruel eyes, the feeling of being trapped. "Because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't." Lucian's gaze softened, just a fraction. "Fear can be a weapon, or it can destroy you. You need to decide which." Before she could respond, a rustle in the bushes drew their attention. Lucian's eyes sharpened, his body coiling like a spring. The stag. They moved as one, slipping through the underbrush. Cara's senses were on high alert, every sound amplified, every scent sharper. The stag was close, she could hear its heartbeat, smell its fear. They spotted it in a clearing, a majestic creature with antlers like branches. Lucian signaled, and they moved into position. Cara's pulse raced. This was it, the moment to prove herself. Lucian nodded, and she moved, silent, swift. The stag sensed them at the last moment, its eyes widening, muscles tensing. It bolted, but they were ready. Cara sprang forward, her body moving with a grace she didn't know she possessed. She was faster, stronger. She could feel the power humming beneath her skin. But then something shifted. A scent, faint, familiar, hit her like a punch. Wolves, not from Silver Ridge. Marcus's pack. "Lucian?" Her voice was a harsh whisper. He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "Marcus's wolves. They're here." Lucian's expression darkened. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I know their scent." He didn't question her. "We need to move, now." They turned, but it was too late. Shadows moved in the trees, eyes glowing like embers. Wolves stepped into the clearing, their bodies tense, their eyes fixed on Cara. Axel was at the front, his silver hair catching the light. "Cara," he said, his voice almost gentle. "You didn't think you could hide forever, did you?" Lucian stepped forward, placing himself between Cara and the others. "She's under my protection." Axel's eyes flicked to Lucian, a smirk curling his lips. "This isn't your fight, Alpha. Hand her over and we'll leave." Lucian's voice was a low growl. "No." The tension snapped like a bowstring. Axel lunged, and the clearing exploded into chaos. Cara moved on instinct, claws extending, adrenaline surging. She fought like she had never fought before, every movement fueled by desperation. Lucian was a blur of motion beside her, his strength undeniable, his presence like a force of nature. Wolves clashed, teeth and claws flashing. Cara took down one of Marcus's wolves, her body moving with a ferocity that surprised even her. She wasn't the frightened Omega anymore. She was something more, something wild and unbroken. But the enemy was relentless. Axel was stronger than she remembered, his movements calculated, precise. He came for her, his eyes cold. "You should have stayed," he hissed, swinging a clawed hand. She blocked, the impact jarring. "I'd rather die." "Then so be it." He struck again, faster this time. She dodged, barely, but she was tiring. Her muscles burned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Axel's eyes glinted with triumph. But then Lucian was there, his body a wall of strength. He struck Axel hard, sending him sprawling. "Stay away from her." Axel snarled, but he was outnumbered. He fell back, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't over, Cara. Marcus will come for you. And when he does, not even this pack will save you." He disappeared into the forest, his wolves following. The silence that followed was heavy, the scent of blood hanging in the air. Lucian turned to Cara, his eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her body ached. "Why did you protect me?" He didn't answer immediately. "Because you're one of us now, and because I won't let Marcus win." The forest was silent in the wake of the battle, the scent of blood and adrenaline still thick in the air. Cara's body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. She could still feel the weight of Axel's words, the promise of more violence to come. Lucian stood a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the spot where Axel had disappeared into the shadows. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. Finally, he turned to her. "You fought well." Cara swallowed hard, her throat dry. "They'll be back. Marcus won't stop." Lucian's gaze softened, just a fraction. "I know." The pack began to gather around them, their eyes filled with questions and unspoken concerns. Rhea approached, her face set in a hard line. "Who were they?" "Wolves from the Crimson Moon Pack," Lucian said, his voice low. "Sent by Marcus." Rhea's eyes narrowed. "You brought them here," she said to Cara, her tone accusatory. "You put us all in danger." Cara's heart clenched. She had expected this. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't choose to be hunted." Rhea opened her mouth to respond, but Lucian cut her off. "Enough. She's part of this pack now. We protect our own." Rhea's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff. Lucian watched her go before turning back to Cara. "You need to rest. Tomorrow, we'll decide our next move." Back in her cabin, Cara sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. The fight replayed in her head, the fear, the desperation, the raw violence. She had fought for her life, for a place in this pack. But had she brought ruin to them instead? A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened and Lucian stepped inside. You should lock your door, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. She shrugged. Would it matter? He didn't answer, just leaned against the wall, his eyes studying her. You're thinking too much. Wouldn't you? She shot back. This pack. It's because of me that they're in danger. He shook his head. Marcus was always going to come. He's been pushing at our borders for months. You're not the cause of this. Cara looked away. Then what am I? Lucian's gaze softened. A catalyst, maybe, or a survivor. She scoffed. I don't feel like either. He stepped closer, the air between them charged. You can't keep running from what you are, Cara. Sooner or later, you'll have to face it. She met his eyes, the intensity there almost too much to bear. And what am I? For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, more than you know. The next morning, Cara found herself standing in the center of the pack's meeting hall, a large, open space with wooden beams and a fire pit that cast flickering shadows on the walls. The entire pack was gathered, their eyes on her. She could feel their suspicion, their fear. Lucian stood at the front, his presence commanding. Rhea was beside him, her expression hard, arms crossed over her chest. We need to discuss our next move, Lucian said, his voice carrying through the room. Marcus won't stop. We need to be... A murmur rippled through the pack. One of the betas, a broad-shouldered man named Orion, stepped forward. Why are we protecting her? She's not one of us. Lucian's eyes flashed. She is now. Orion didn't back down. And what if she's a spy? What if Marcus sent her here to weaken us from the inside? Cara's fists clenched. I would rather die than serve Marcus. Orion's eyes narrowed. Words are easy. Enough, Lucian said, his voice a low growl. We don't have time for this. Marcus is coming and we need to be united. There was silence, heavy and tense. Finally, Rhea spoke. What's your plan? Lucian's gaze swept over the pack. We fortify the borders. Patrols will double. And we prepare for war. A chill ran through Cara. War. It had always been a distant threat, something she had feared but never truly believed would happen. Now, it was here. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the pack shifted. There was a sense of urgency, of preparation. Wolves trained harder, patrols ran longer. Cara threw herself into the work, determined to prove herself. Rhea was relentless, pushing her harder than anyone else. Every sparring session was brutal, every lesson a test. But Cara didn't break. She couldn't afford to. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal training session, Rhea approached her, sweat glistening on her brow. You're stronger than I thought, she admitted, her tone grudging. Cara managed a tired smile. Thanks. Rhea hesitated, then said, I don't trust easily, but you're earning it. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. That night, Cara found herself standing on a ridge overlooking the forest. The moon was full, casting silver light over the trees. She felt Lucian's presence before she saw him. He stood beside her, silent for a moment. The patrols reported movement near the border. Marcus? He nodded. It won't be long now. Cara's heart tightened. What if we lose? Lucian's eyes found hers. We won't. How can you be so sure? Because we have something Marcus doesn't. He paused. We have you. She shook her head. I'm not. Yes, you are. His voice was firm. You're stronger than you know, Cara. And when the time comes, you'll prove it. The moonlight bathed the ridge in silver as Kara and Lucian stood side by side. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant promise of rain. Lucian's words echoed in her mind. We have you. She wanted to believe him, wanted to find strength in those simple words. But doubt gnawed at her, a persistent shadow that refused to be silenced. What if she wasn't enough? What if she brought ruin to the only sanctuary she had ever known? Lucian's eyes studied her, piercing through her defenses. You're thinking too much again. She forced a smile. It's a bad habit. He didn't return the smile. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence a steadying force. Fear is natural, but don't let it control you. Easy for you to say, she muttered. You're not the one being hunted. His eyes darkened. I've been hunted, Cara, more than once. She looked at him surprised. By who? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, His voice was low, almost a whisper. Another alpha. Years ago. I lost. Someone important. The pain in his voice was like a physical blow. For the first time, she saw past the alpha, past the strength and the power. She saw the man beneath, the scars he carried, the battles he had fought. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shook his head. Don't be. It made me who I am. He turned to face her, his eyes intense. And you'll become stronger from this, I know it. She wanted to believe him. But deep down, a part of her was still that frightened Omega, running through the forest, desperate to escape. Could she really become something more? The next few days were a blur of preparation. The pack was a hive of activity. Patrols were doubled, traps were set, and the air was thick with anticipation. Cara trained harder than ever, her body pushed to its limits. Rhea was relentless, but there was a grudging respect in her eyes now. You're getting better, she said one afternoon, after a particularly brutal sparring session. Cara wiped sweat from her brow. Thanks to you. Rhea's eyes softened, just a fraction. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You've earned it. It wasn't much, but it was something. As night fell, the pack gathered in the meeting hall. The tension was palpable. Lucian stood at the front, his presence commanding as always. Marcus is close, he said, his voice steady. Our scouts have reported movement near the eastern border. He'll attack soon. A murmur ran through the pack. Cara felt their fear, their uncertainty. It mirrored her own. Lucian's eyes swept over them. We've trained for this. We're ready. Marcus underestimates us. He thinks we're weak. He thinks we'll break. But we won't. The pack responded with a low growl of agreement, the sound rumbling through the room like thunder. Cara felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. Fear, yes, but also hope. As the pack dispersed, Cara found herself alone in the training ground. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the clearing. She practiced her moves, each strike a desperate attempt to silence the doubts in her mind. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. You're pushing too hard. She spun around, heart pounding. Lucian stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her. I need to be ready, she said, her voice tight. He walked toward her, his movements fluid, predatory. You are ready. She shook her head. You don't know that. He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching hers. I do. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, he said, You're not alone, Cara. She swallowed hard. It feels like I am. He stepped closer, his voice soft. I won't let Marcus take you. I promise. The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. For a moment, she forgot everything. The looming battle, the fear, the uncertainty. There was only him, and the unspoken bond growing between them. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this for me? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. Because I see you, he said softly. Not the Omega Marcus tried to break, the warrior you've become. Her heart pounded. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned into his touch, finding a strength there that she hadn't known she needed. The morning dawned cold and gray. The air was thick with the scent of rain and impending violence. The pack gathered at the edge of the forest, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Lucian stood at the front, his presence a steadying force. Cara was beside him, her heart pounding. They're coming, Rhea said, her voice low. Lucian nodded. Stay together. Watch each other's back. The first sign of Marcus's wolves was a rustle in the trees, a flicker of movement. Then they were there, emerging from the shadows like ghosts. Axel was at the front, his eyes locked on Cara. You should have stayed hidden, he called. Lucian stepped forward. You shouldn't have come here. Axel's eyes narrowed. This is your last chance. Hand her over and we'll leave. Lucian's voice was a low growl. Never. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, without warning, Axel lunged. The clearing exploded into chaos. Wolves clashed, teeth and claws flashing. The scent of blood filled the air. Cara moved on instinct, every lesson she had learned, every scar she carried, guiding her. She fought like she had never fought before, each movement a desperate bid for survival. Axel came for her, his eyes cold. You can't escape, Cara. She met his gaze, fire burning in her eyes. I'm not running. She struck, her claws finding flesh. Axel staggered, surprise flashing in his eye. Lucian was there, a blur of motion, taking down wolf after wolf. The pack fought as one, each member a part of something larger, something unbreakable. But Marcus's wolves were relentless. Cara saw Lucian fall, saw Axel standing over him, claws raised. No, she screamed, lunging forward. Axel turned, his eyes glinting. You can't save him. She didn't hesitate. She struck, every ounce of strength, every shred of desperation, fueling her. Axel fell, blood staining the ground. The battle was over. But the war had just begun. The battlefield was a graveyard of silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the survivors and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Cara's heart pounded as she knelt beside Lucian, her hands shaking. Blood stained his shirt, seeping from a deep gash across his chest. His eyes fluttered open, the pain clear in his expression. Lucian! Her voice was a mix of panic and urgency. He managed a weak smile. It's just a scratch. Don't joke. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her hand against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. We need help. Rhea appeared at her side, her face pale but determined. We'll take him to the healer. Stay with him. Cara nodded, her heart in her throat. Together, they carried Lucian back to the pack's stronghold, each step a battle against the weight of exhaustion and fear. The pack followed, their expressions a mix of relief and grief. They had won, but at what cost? The healer, an older woman named Ilara, worked quickly, her hands deft and sure. She cleaned the wound, muttering incantations under her breath. Cara hovered nearby, her fingers twisting nervously. He'll live, Ilara finally said, her voice calm but tired. But he needs rest. He lost a lot of blood. Cara's knees almost gave way. Relief flooded through her, leaving her weak. Thank you. Ilara's eyes softened. He's strong, stronger than most. But strength isn't just physical, child. Remember that. Cara nodded, her mind spinning. She sank into a chair beside Lucian's bed, watching as his chest rose and fell. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Marcus was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he had her, or until she was dead. As Lucian slept, Cara drifted into a restless doze. Memories surfaced, memories she had tried to bury. She was back in the Crimson Moon Pack's territory, the scent of pine and blood thick in the air. Marcus loomed over her, his eyes cold and cruel. You think you can run, little Omega? There's nowhere you can hide. She remembered the fear, the desperation, the way he had hunted her, the way he had taken everything she had ever loved. Her family, her freedom, gone in an instant. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. Lucian's eyes were open, watching her. Bad dream? She nodded, swallowing hard. Marcus. He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand. His touch was steady, grounding. You're safe here. For how long? Her voice was barely a whisper. As long as it takes. His eyes held a promise, one she desperately wanted to believe. The next day, a council meeting was called. The surviving members of the pack gathered in the hall, their faces weary but resolute. Lucian, pale but standing, took his place at the front. Cara sat beside him, feeling the weight of their gazes. We've driven them back, Lucian began, his voice strong despite the lingering pain. But Marcus won't stop. He's lost too much to back down now. Orion, one of the betas, stood. What do? We can't keep fighting forever. Our numbers are dwindling. Lucian's gaze was hard. We prepare, we train, and we fight. Rhea's eyes narrowed. And what about her? She pointed at Cara. She's the reason he's coming after us. Cara's heart clenched. I didn't ask for this. No, Rhea said, her voice cold. But you brought it here, and now we're paying the price. Lucian's voice was a low growl. She's part of this pack now. We protect our own. Rhea's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, a powder keg waiting to explode. That night, Cara found herself standing on the ridge again, the wind cold against her skin. Lucian joined her, his movement slow but steady. You shouldn't be out here, she said, concern in her voice. He shrugged. I needed air. They stood in silence, the night stretching out around them. Finally, Cara spoke. Why did you defend me today? Rhea was right. This is my fault. Lucian's gaze was steady. No. This is Marcus's fault. He's the one who chose violence. You're just caught in the middle. She looked away. I'm not worth this. The pack needs you, he interrupted. Whether they know it or not. She shook her head. I don't understand. He stepped closer, his presence a comfort. You will, in time. The night was quiet, the wind rustling through the trees, carrying with it the distant scent of rain. Cara stood on the ridge, staring out at the vast forest that stretched beyond the horizon. Each day brought her closer to the pack, yet further away from the life she once knew. Lucian's presence behind her was a quiet pulse of heat. She sensed him before she saw him, the weight of his gaze settling on her like a blanket. You should be resting, she said softly. He stepped closer, his voice low. So should you. She turned to face him, her heart catching at the way the moonlight traced the sharp angles of his face. I couldn't sleep. His eyes searched hers, piercing and intense. Nightmares again? She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Marcus. The things he did. I can't shake it. Lucian's jaw tightened, a flicker of something dark passing through his eyes. He won't hurt you again. I swear it. The promise hung between them, heavy and unspoken. She wanted to believe him, wanted to wrap herself in the safety of his words, but doubt lingered, a ghost she couldn't shake. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why risk everything for me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence wrapping around her like a shield. Because you're worth it. Her breath caught. You don't even know me. His eyes softened. I know enough. She looked away, her heart pounding. I'm just a burden. No, he said firmly, his hand reaching out to tilt her chin up. You're strong, Cara. Stronger than you know. She felt the heat of his touch, the calluses on his fingers. The connection between them was a live wire, thrumming with unspoken emotions. I don't feel strong, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Lucian's eyes didn't waver. You stood up to Marcus. You fought when you could have run. That takes more strength than you realize. She wanted to argue, to deny the truth in his words. But standing there, with his hand on her chin and the moonlight casting shadows across their faces, she couldn't. Lucian. Her voice trembled. He leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You're not alone, Cara. Not anymore. Their breaths mingled, the space between them shrinking until it felt like the world had narrowed to this single moment. His lips were a breath away from hers, his gaze dark and intense. Time seemed to stop. The air was thick with tension, with unspoken words and unfulfilled promises. She wanted to close the distance, to feel his lips on hers, to lose herself in the safety of his arms. But fear held her back, fear of what this meant, of what she would lose if she let herself feel. Lucian, her voice trailed off, uncertainty lacing her words. He didn't move, didn't push. I know, it's okay. The gentleness in his voice broke something inside her. She had spent so long running, so long fighting to survive. Now, standing here with him, she felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her head resting against his chest. His arms came around her, strong and steady, holding her together as she threatened to fall apart. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the only sound the quiet rustle of leaves and the steady beat of his heart. As the night stretched on, they found themselves sitting on the ridge, the distant stars overhead. Lucian's presence was a steadying force, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. He broke the silence. I lost someone once. She looked at him, surprised. Who? He didn't meet her eyes. My mate. Years ago, she was, taken by a rival pack. Cara's heart ached. I'm sorry. He shook his head. It was a long time ago. But it changed me. Made me who I am. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. It must have been hard. His eyes met hers, the vulnerability there catching her off guard. It was, but it taught me something important. What? To protect what matters, no matter the cost. The intensity in his gaze stole her breath. She knew he wasn't just talking about the pack, he was talking about her. Lucian. Her voice was a whisper. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm here. She leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The days following the battle were a blur of recovery and preparation. The pack worked tirelessly to repair the damage, both to their home and their spirits. Lucian was always in the thick of it, leading patrols, coordinating efforts, his presence a constant reassurance. Yet no matter how busy he was, his attention always seemed to drift back to Cara. She found herself drawn to him, too. His strength, his steadiness, it was like a beacon in the storm. But more than that, it was the quiet moments that stayed with her. The way he looked at her, the way he listened. He saw her, in a way no one ever had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cara found herself on the training ground. She practiced the moves Rhea had taught her, each strike a release of the tension coiled inside her. You're improving. Lucian's voice broke through her concentration, sending a shiver down her spine. She turned to find him leaning against a tree, arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. She lowered her stance, catching her breath. I have a good teacher. He pushed away from the tree, walking toward her. You've always had it in you. You just needed someone to help you see it. His words stirred something inside her, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. Why do you believe in me so much? He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching hers. Because I know what it's like to be broken. To feel like you're not enough. But you are, Cara, more than enough. She looked away, the intensity of his gaze too much. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, turning her face back to his. Then let me remind... Her breath caught. The space between them seemed to disappear, the air thick with unspoken words and lingering tension. His hand lingered on her cheek, his touch gentle but firm. Lucian. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. He leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Tell me to stop, and I will. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. The world narrowed to this moment, to the feel of his hand on her skin, the heat of his breath against her lips. Slowly, he closed the distance, his lips brushing against hers. A tentative, questioning kiss. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it set her blood on fire. She leaned into him, her hands finding their way to his chest, clutching at the fabric of his shirt as if he were the only thing holding her together. The kiss deepened, the world falling away until there was only Lucian, the taste of him, the feel of his arms around her, strong and protective. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for a long time, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. So have I. They spent the next few days dancing around each other, the memory of that kiss hanging between them like a secret. Lucian was still the alpha, still the leader of the pack, but in those quiet moments when it was just the two of them, he was something more, something softer. One evening, as they sat by the fire in his quarters, he watched her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite define. What are you thinking? She asked, her voice soft. He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. That I never expected this. This? She prompted. He met her gaze, his expression serious. You, us. I've spent so long closing myself off, Cara. After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. Her heart ached for him. You don't have to talk about it. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I want to. You deserve to know. She waited, giving him the space to gather his thoughts. Her name was Alara, he began. We grew up together. She was everything to me. When the rival pack attacked, I couldn't save her. I tried, but... His voice broke and he looked away. You don't have to carry that alone, she whispered, squeezing his hand. He looked back at her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability. I've spent years trying to protect this pack, trying to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. But with you, it's different. It's not just about the pack, it's personal. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Lucian. He leaned closer, his hand cupping her cheek. I won't let anything happen to you. I can't. Their lips met again, the kiss deeper, more desperate this time. It was a promise, a declaration of everything they couldn't say. She melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. You're everything I didn't know I needed. She smiled, her heart full. You too. Days blurred into nights as the pack continued to fortify their territory, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Marcus. The forest that had once been a peaceful haven now felt like a battleground, each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig sending waves of tension through the air. But through it all, Lucian and Cara found solace in each other's presence, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Lucian was always there, steady and strong, his presence a calming force against the backdrop of chaos. Yet even in the quiet moments, when the pack was at rest, there was an intensity between them, a magnetic pull that neither could deny. One evening, as they sat beneath the canopy of trees, the warmth of the fire crackling in the distance, Lucian's fingers brushed against Cara's. The touch was light at first, almost casual, but neither of them pulled away. Cara looked up at him, her heart racing. Lucian, she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. He turned to her, his gaze intense. What is it? She swallowed, unsure of how to voice the emotions swirling inside her. I'm scared. He didn't say anything at first. He simply cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her skin. His touch was soft, reassuring. What are you afraid of? Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the last remnants of the sunset bled into the night sky. That I'll lose you, she confessed, her voice trembling. That we'll never have a chance at something real. His expression softened, and he leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. You won't lose me. I swear it. Her heart raced at his words, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her fear like a blade. She turned to face him fully, her hand reaching for his, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to fall away. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice shaky. I've spent so long running, fighting. I don't know how to let someone in. Lucian's gaze softened, and he gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You don't have to know. We'll figure it out together. She looked into his eyes, searching for the strength she needed, and found it in him, in the quiet, unwavering confidence he exuded. I want to believe you, she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. You can, he said softly, his lips brushing against her forehead in a tender kiss. You have me, Cara, always. The world around them seemed to fade as their connection deepened, the bond between them becoming something unspoken, something neither could deny. Her heart fluttered as his lips met hers in a kiss that was slow, almost reverent, as though he were savoring the moment, imprinting it into his very soul. She melted into him, every part of her body aware of the man before her, the man who had not only saved her, but had given her a sense of belonging she hadn't known she'd been searching for. The kiss deepened, and this time Cara didn't hesitate. She let go of the fear, the uncertainty, and allowed herself to lose herself in the moment, in Lucian's arms, in the promise of something real. Over the next few weeks, their relationship grew stronger, more intense. The connection between Cara and Lucian was undeniable, built not just on attraction but on a deep, unspoken trust. Yet, as much as they found comfort in each other, the weight of the looming threat hung over them both. Marcus wasn't done with them. The battle was far from over. One night, as the pack gathered around a fire, Lucian stood at the front, addressing the warriors. Cara sat on the edge of the circle, her heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows of the trees seemed to watch them all. Lucian's commanding voice filled the air as he spoke to the warriors, preparing them for the conflict that loomed ahead. After the meeting, Cara found herself alone in the woods, walking among the trees, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts of the future, of Marcus, of everything they stood to lose. Cara! She turned at the sound of his voice, her pulse quickening as Lucian emerged from the shadows. His presence was like a balm to her restless heart, but even his closeness couldn't dispel the nagging worry that gnawed at her. "Lucian," she said softly, walking toward him. "I can't stop thinking about it." He closed the distance between them, his eyes searching hers. "Thinking about what?" "About what comes next, about Marcus, about losing everything." She shook her head, frustrated. "I'm not strong enough for this." His hand gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing over her skin as he looked down at her with a mixture of love and determination. "You're stronger than you know. You've been through so much, Cara, and you've come out the other side stronger, braver." "I don't feel that way," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "I feel like I'm drowning." Lucian's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She breathed in the comforting scent of him, earth and pine, strength and warmth. "You're not alone, Cara," he murmured. "I'm right here. We'll face it together." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she clung to him, her chest tight with the weight of everything she had been holding inside. She didn't want to be strong anymore. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to be with him. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "You won't," Lucian promised, his voice fierce. "I'll protect you with everything I have." She looked up at him, her heart aching with the depth of her feelings. "I don't know if I can live in a world without you." His gaze softened, and he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "You don't have to." "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. Forever." He kissed her then, slow and tender, his lips brushing hers with a sweetness that spoke volumes. She melted into the kiss, every worry, every fear fading away as she lost herself in the man who had become her everything. The moon hung heavy and full in the sky, casting its silver light across the dense forest. The pact's territory was unusually quiet, the typical sounds of nocturnal life stifled by the tension that rippled through the air. Cara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind restless despite the exhaustion tugging at her body. A soft knock at the door startled her. She sat up, her pulse quickening. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Lucian stepped inside, his expression unreadable, but his presence immediately calming. He shut the door behind him and crossed the room in a few long strides, his eyes fixed on hers. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He shook his head, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The scouts just returned. Marcus's forces are closer than we thought. They'll be at our borders by dawn." Her heart sank. "So soon?" Lucian nodded, his jaw tightening. "We're as ready as we can be, but I needed to see you before things begin." She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing against his. "Lucian." His hand turned to grip hers, warm and strong. "I don't want you anywhere near the battlefield, Cara. I need to know you're safe." She frowned, her resolve hardening. "I can fight. I've been training." "I know," he interrupted gently, his gaze softening as it met hers. "I've seen how far you've come, and I'm proud of you. But I can't focus if I'm worried about you being out there. Please, stay here. For me." Her chest tightened at the vulnerability in his voice. Lucian, the alpha who carried the weight of an entire pack on his shoulders, was pleading with her. "Okay," she whispered. Relief flickered in his eyes, and he leaned forward, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the coming battle hanging over them. Cara broke the quiet. "Promise me you'll come back." His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "Nothing will keep me from you, I promise." The morning dawned with a muted sky, gray clouds heavy with the threat of rain. Cara stood at the edge of the pack house, her stomach churning as she watched Lucian and the warriors assemble. He stood tall and commanding, giving orders with an authority that left no room for doubt. Her eyes locked with his as he turned toward her one last time. He gave her a small nod, the unspoken promise in his gaze steadying her nerves. Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest with the others, leaving an aching void in his wake. Hours passed like lifetimes. The distant sounds of the battle, growls, roars, the clash of claws and teeth, filtered through the forest, each noise tightening the knot of anxiety in her chest. Cara paced the pack house, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. A scream pierced the air, sharp and unmistakable. It was followed by a guttural growl that sent a chill down her spine. Her instincts screamed at her to stay put, but she couldn't. She had to know. She had to help. Grabbing a small dagger she had kept from training sessions, Cara bolted from the pack house, her feet carrying her toward the sounds of chaos. The forest blurred around her as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. When she broke through the tree line, the sight before her stole her breath. The clearing was a whirlwind of movement, wolves locked in combat, blood staining the earth. And there, at the center, was Lucian. He was battling Marcus himself, their forms shifting between man and wolf as they clashed. Lucian's strength was formidable, but Marcus was relentless, his strikes vicious and calculated. Cara's heart clenched as she watched Lucian stagger, blood dripping from a deep gash on his side. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Lucian!" Her voice carried across the battlefield, drawing both men's attention. Lucian's eyes widened in shock, his distraction costing him as Marcus landed a brutal blow that sent him sprawling to the ground. "No!" Cara screamed, rushing forward. Marcus turned his attention to her, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Ah, the runaway bride. You should have stayed hidden, little girl." Lucian forced himself to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you dare touch her." But Marcus was faster. He lunged at Cara, his claws outstretched. She reacted on instinct, ducking under his strike and plunging the dagger into his side. Marcus roared in pain, staggering back, his hand clutching the wound. Lucian was on him in an instant, his movements fueled by pure rage. He shifted into his wolf form, his massive figure pinning Marcus to the ground. With a powerful bite, he ended the fight, leaving Marcus lifeless beneath him. The clearing fell silent, the remaining members of Marcus's forces scattering into the forest. Lucian shifted back, his breaths ragged as he stumbled toward Cara. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a mix of relief and exasperation. Tears streamed down her face as she threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. "I couldn't stay away. I had to make sure you were okay." He pulled back just enough to cup her face, his eyes searching hers. "You're reckless, stubborn, and you scare the hell out of me." A shaky laugh escaped her. "Sounds like we're a perfect match." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, as though she were the only thing anchoring him to this world. She clung to him, pouring all her relief, fear, and love into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You saved me." "And you've saved me more times than I can count," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Not without you." The battlefield had gone quiet, the eerie silence settling like a shroud over the clearing. The pack members who survived began gathering their wounded, their somber faces reflecting the heavy cost of victory. Cara stayed close to Lucian as they made their way back to the pack house, his arm draped around her shoulders for support. Though his steps were strong, she could see the pain etched into his features. Once inside, the pack's healer, an elderly wolf named Maeve, rushed to tend to Lucian's wounds. Cara hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. Maeve worked with quiet efficiency, cleaning and stitching the gash on Lucian's side. Every wince, every sharp intake of breath was like a dagger to Cara's heart. "You're lucky," Maeve said, her tone scolding but affectionate, a few inches to the left, and this could have been much worse. Lucian chuckled weakly, glancing at Cara. "I had a guardian angel looking out for..." Cara flushed, her eyes darting to the floor. Maeve smirked knowingly as she packed away her supplies. "He needs rest, and so do you, Cara. You've both been through enough for one day." After Maeve left, Cara helped Lucian into bed, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled the blanket over him. "You scared me?" she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian reached out, taking her hand and pulling her down beside him. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I never wanted you to see that." "I couldn't stay behind," she confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I'd lose you." He cupped her face, brushing away a stray tear with his thumb. "You won't lose me, Cara. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She leaned into his touch, her heart aching with the depth of her emotions. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Good thing you don't have to find out," he said with a faint smile. She stayed by his side that night, her fingers entwined with his as he drifted off to sleep. The steady rise and fall of his chest was a balm to her frayed nerves, and for the first time since the battle, she allowed herself to hope. They had survived, together. The days that followed were a blur of recovery. Lucian healed quickly, his shifter abilities accelerating the process, but Cara insisted on hovering over him anyway. She brought him meals, helped change his bandages, and even managed to coax a smile from him when she jokingly threatened to tie him to the bed if he didn't rest. Their bond deepened in those quiet moments. Cara began to see sides of Lucian that he rarely showed anyone else. The playful smirk he wore when he teased her, the quiet vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about the pact's future. She found herself falling for him more with each passing day. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony outside his room, watching the sun set over the forest, Lucian turned to her, his expression serious. "You've changed me," he said quietly. She blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "Before you came into my life, I was closed off. I thought I had to carry everything alone, my guilt, my responsibility to the pack, but you've shown me that I don't have to do it by myself, that I don't want to." Her heart swelled at his words. "You don't have to, Lucian. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His gaze softened and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You make me believe in things I thought I'd lost. Love, hope, a future." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she leaned closer, her forehead resting against his. "You've given me the same. I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged, but I do. With you." Their lips met in a kiss that was slow and tender, filled with unspoken promises. Cara's hand slid up to his shoulders, her fingers tangling in his hair as he pulled her closer. Time seemed to stand still as they lost themselves in each other, the world around them fading away. When they finally pulled apart, Lucian rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "You're my mate, Cara," he said softly, the words carrying a weight that made her heart skip a beat. "In every way that matters." Her breath caught, and she searched his eyes for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was love and certainty. "Lucian, I feel the same." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that lit up his face. "Good, because I'm never letting you go." Though the pack celebrated their victory over Marcus, Lucian and Cara knew their troubles weren't over. Marcus's death had created a power vacuum, and whispers of rival packs looking to take advantage of the chaos had already begun to reach their ears. One afternoon, as Cara walked through the forest with Lucian, she broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens now? With the pack, I mean." Lucian sighed, his hand resting on the small of her back. "We strengthen our borders, rebuild what we lost, but we also need to forge alliances. We can't stand alone if another war is coming." Cara nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll do whatever it takes, together." He stopped, turning to face her. "You mean that?" "Of course," she said, meeting his gaze. "This is my home now. These people are my family. And you." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "You're everything to me, Lucian." Emotion flickered across his face, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her hair. "Yes, you do," she whispered fiercely. "You deserve love, happiness, all of it, and I'll make sure you have it." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with passion and gratitude, as though she were the only thing anchoring him to this world. And in that moment, Cara knew she would face whatever challenges lay ahead, as long as she had Lucian by her side. In the weeks following Marcus's defeat, the pack's territory returned to an uneasy calm. The scent of blood and fear faded from the air, but whispers of unrest spread like wildfire. Packs from neighboring regions, once content to ignore each other, were now sending envoys and emissaries, testing boundaries and vying for alliances. Lucian stood at the head of the pack's war council, his voice steady and commanding as he addressed his advisors. Cara sat nearby, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of the changes within the pack. She wasn't just the Alpha's mate, she was quickly becoming a trusted confidant and bridge between factions. "We've received word from the Silver Moon Pack," Lucian announced. "They're willing to meet, but their Alpha, Rafe, is notoriously unpredictable. We need this alliance, but it won't come easily." "Silver Moon's territory borders ours to the east," one of the advisors said, his brow furrowed. "If we can secure their support, it'll deter any other packs from trying to encroach. And if Rafe decides to take advantage of our weakened state?" Another countered. "We can't trust him." Cara spoke up, her voice steady but measured. "We don't have to trust him completely, but we can find common ground. Rafe values strength, doesn't he? We show him that we're strong, that we're worth aligning with." Lucian's gaze flicked to her, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "She's right. Rafe respects power. If we go in prepared, we can negotiate from a position of strength." The council murmured their agreement, and plans were set for a meeting with the Silver Moon Pack. Cara would accompany Lucian, her role crucial in presenting a united front. The journey to the Silver Moon Pack's territory was tense but uneventful. Cara rode beside Lucian, her nerves masked by a calm exterior. The forest grew denser as they approached the border, the air charged with an unspoken challenge. It was neutral ground, but the weight of crossing into another pack's land was not lost on anyone. Rafe awaited them in a sprawling stone manor at the heart of his territory. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair gleaming under the light of the chandelier. His sharp features and piercing blue eyes carried a hint of amusement as he welcomed them. "Alpha Lucian," Rafe drawled, his voice smooth but tinged with mockery. "And your mate. What a surprise." Lucian's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. "We're here to discuss an alliance, not exchange pleasantries." Rafe smirked, his gaze sliding to Cara. "She's bold, bringing her into a room full of wolves who'd love to test her mettle." Cara stepped forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And she's more than capable of holding her own." Rafe chuckled, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "I like her. Fine, let's talk." The negotiations were grueling, Rafe testing every boundary and challenging Lucian at every turn. Cara's quick thinking and sharp tongue proved invaluable, diffusing tensions and redirecting conversations when they threatened to spiral. As the night wore on, it became clear that Rafe wasn't just testing their resolve, he was assessing their loyalty. "You speak of alliances," he said, swirling a glass of whiskey. "But what happens when another pack comes calling? What guarantees do I have that you won't turn on us?" Lucian's voice was firm. "We protect what's ours. An alliance with us means mutual protection, mutual benefit. We're stronger together than apart." Cara added, "And an alliance with us sends a message. It shows the other packs that we're united, that we won't be easy targets." Rafe leaned back, studying them. "You've given me a lot to think about. I'll have my answer in a week." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. As they returned home, Cara couldn't shake the feeling that Rafe's agreement would come with strings attached. Lucian seemed to sense it too, his expression troubled as they rode back through the forest. Their concerns were validated a few days later when a messenger arrived with news from the Blackthorn Pack, a rival group with a reputation for brutality. Their alpha, a wolf named Calder, had extended an invitation for a meeting, but the intent was clear: intimidation. "They're testing us," Lucian said grimly, pacing the war room. "They want to see if we'll back down." "We can't show weakness," Cara said, her voice steady. "But we also can't afford to get drawn into another fight." The pack debated long into the night, weighing their options. In the end, it was decided that Lucian and Cara would meet Calder, but with a contingent of warriors waiting just out of sight. The Blackthorn Pack's territory was stark and unwelcoming, the air thick with tension. Calder greeted them with a wolfish grin, his scarred face a testament to countless battles. His eyes lingered on Cara, a predatory gleam in his gaze that made Lucian bristle. "So," Calder said, his voice a low rumble, "the mighty Alpha Lucian and his little mate. Come to beg for mercy?" Lucian's lips curled into a snarl, but Cara stepped forward, her chin held high. "We came to talk. But if you'd rather trade insults, we can leave." Calder's laughter boomed through the room. "Feisty. I like that. All right, let's talk." The conversation was a dance of veiled threats and posturing, Calder pushing to see how far he could go before Lucian snapped. Cara played her part masterfully, redirecting the conversation and keeping Lucian grounded. In the end, Calder made his stance clear. You're strong, Lucian, but strength doesn't guarantee survival. The moment you falter, the rest of us will be there to pick apart what's left. It wasn't an alliance, but it was a warning. They left Blackthorn territory with a clear understanding. The pack was still vulnerable, and their enemies were circling. Back in the safety of their territory, the urgency of the situation weighed heavily on Cara and Lucian. The pack needed more than brute strength to ensure its survival. They needed unity and trust, both within their ranks and among allies. Cara spent her days working alongside the pack members, listening to their concerns and helping wherever she could. She joined training sessions, sparred with the younger wolves, and even participated in the grueling patrol shifts. Her presence became a rallying point for the pack. She wasn't just the alpha's mate, she was one of them. One evening, Cara sat around a bonfire with a group of warriors, sharing stories and laughter. The flickering flames cast a warm glow over the group, and for a moment, it felt like the pack's troubles were far away. "You're different," said Finn, one of the older warriors. His tone was curious rather than accusatory. "Most alpha mates don't get their hands dirty." Cara smiled, her gaze steady. "I'm not most alpha mates. This pack is my family now. I'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Finn nodded, respect shining in his eyes. "We're lucky to have you." A few days later, a messenger arrived with surprising news. A pack from the northern mountains, the Iron Claws, had expressed interest in meeting. The Iron Claws were known for their isolationist tendencies, rarely involving themselves in the affairs of other packs. Their leader, Alpha Elena, was a formidable figure, a lone wolf who had carved out a powerful territory against all odds. Lucian and Cara debated the risks and rewards of accepting the invitation. "Elena doesn't make alliances lightly," Lucian said, pacing the room. "If she's reaching out, it means she sees an opportunity, or a threat." Cara leaned against the table, her brow furrowed in thought. "If she sees us as a threat, she wouldn't be asking to meet. This could be our chance to tip the scales in our favor." They decided to take the risk. Accompanied by a small escort, they traveled to the northern mountains, the landscape growing harsher and more forbidding as they climbed. When they reached the Iron Claw's stronghold, they were met by a group of wolves who looked as rugged and unyielding as the terrain they called home. Alpha Elena emerged from the crowd, her presence commanding. She was tall and lithe, her piercing green eyes taking in Lucian and Cara with sharp scrutiny. "Welcome to my territory," Elena said, her voice cool and precise. "I've heard much about you, Alpha Lucian. And you, Cara." Cara straightened, meeting Elena's gaze. "Good things, I hope." Elena's lips quirked in a faint smile. "That depends on your perspective." The negotiations that followed were intense but productive. Elena was wary of committing to an alliance, but intrigued by the strength and determination she saw in Lucian and Cara. She agreed to a trial partnership, promising to provide resources and reinforcements in exchange for shared intelligence and a mutual defense pact. As they prepared to leave, Elena pulled Cara aside. "You're the reason he's succeeding," she said bluntly. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." With Cara, a quiet affirmation of the role she was playing. While alliances began to take shape, not all within the pack were content with the changes. Some of the older wolves, still clinging to traditional values, viewed Cara's influence with suspicion. Whispers of dissent began to ripple through the ranks, growing louder with each passing day. Cara was returning from a patrol when she overheard two warriors, Tomas and Lila, speaking in hushed tones near the training grounds. "She's not one of us," Tomas said, his tone laced with contempt. "An outsider can't understand what it means to be part of this pack." "She's trying," Lila argued. "You can't deny she's made a difference." Tomas snorted. "Trying isn't enough. She's a human, weak. What happens when she falters? When her mistakes cost us everything?" The words stung, but Cara forced herself to stay calm. Confronting them now would only escalate the situation. Instead, she decided to address the underlying issues directly. That evening, Cara called a meeting, gathering the entire pack in the Great Hall. Lucian stood beside her, his presence a silent show of support. "I know some of you have doubts about me," Cara began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I know I'm not a born wolf. But I've fought for this pack, bled for it, just like all of you, and I will continue to do so." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. If we're divided, we're vulnerable. But if we stand together, we can overcome anything." There was a moment of silence before Finn stepped forward, his voice ringing out. "She's right. We've seen what she's capable of. She's earned her place here." Others murmured their agreement, and one by one the dissenters began to fall silent. Tomas remained stubborn, but even he couldn't deny the truth of her words. After the meeting, Lucian pulled Cara into his arms, pride shining in his eyes. "You're incredible," he said softly. She smiled, resting her head against his chest. "We're stronger together, remember?" The alliances with the Silver Moon Pack and the Iron Claws bolstered their position, but the threat of the Blackthorn Pack loomed larger than ever. Calder's wolves had been spotted near the borders, their presence a clear provocation. Lucian convened another war council, his expression grim. "Calder is testing us. We need to send a message." "We can't afford an all-out war," Cara interjected. "Not yet. But we can't let him think we're weak either." They devised a plan to strike a balance, launching a series of small strategic attacks to disrupt Calder's operations without fully engaging in battle. Cara insisted on being part of the effort, her determination unshakable. The missions were dangerous, but Cara's quick thinking and unorthodox strategies gave them an edge. Calder's forces were caught off guard, their supply lines severed and their morale shaken. One night, as Kara and Lucian returned from a successful raid, they stood on a hill overlooking the pack's territory. The moon cast a silver glow over the forest, and for a moment, the weight of their responsibilities lifted. Lucian pulled Cara close, his hands resting on her hips. "You're the reason we're winning," he said, his voice filled with emotion. She smiled, leaning into him. "We're winning because we're a team." He kissed her then, slow and deep, the world fading away as they lost themselves in each other. In that moment, amidst the chaos of their lives, they found solace in their bond. Despite the small victories against Calder's forces, tensions within the pack simmered. Whispers of dissent had not completely vanished. Instead, they went underground, where they grew more dangerous. Kara and Lucian, though united and strong, sensed the unrest like a storm on the horizon. One fateful evening, Lucian and Kara returned to the pack house after a long day of border patrol. Kara noticed the unease in the air before she even stepped inside. Conversations hushed as she and Lucian passed, eyes darting away when they turned their gaze on anyone. It wasn't fear, it was guilt. "What's going on?" Kara asked Lucian as they entered his office, her voice low but urgent. Lucian's brow furrowed, his instincts also on high alert. "Something's not right. I'll have Finn look into it." But before Finn could act, the betrayal revealed itself. During a routine gathering in the Great Hall, Tomas, the vocal critic of Cara, stepped forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. "This has gone on long enough," Tomas shouted, silencing the murmurs of the pack. "We've been led astray, weakened by human influence and soft leadership," Lucian growled, his alpha dominance radiating through the room. "Watch your words, Tomas. You question me?" "I question your judgment," Tomas retorted, emboldened by the support of a small but vocal group of wolves who stepped forward to stand with him. "You've allowed an outsider to influence our decisions, to weaken the traditions that have kept this pack strong for generations." Kara's eyes narrowed, but she kept her composure. "And what exactly have I done to weaken this pack, Tomas? Is it leading successful raids against Calder? Securing alliances that have made us stronger?" "You've distracted the Alpha," Tomas snapped. "Your human ways make him weak, and now you've brought danger to our borders. Calder only sees us as a target because of your meddling." Lucian stepped forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "Enough. If you think you're fit to lead this pack, Tomas, challenge me, but be prepared to face the consequences." The room went deadly silent. Tomas hesitated, his bravado faltering under Lucian's piercing glare. Finally he muttered, "This isn't over," and stalked out, his followers trailing behind. The confrontation with Tomas left the pack divided. Cara knew the situation was far from over. Tomas wasn't just a loudmouth, he was dangerous, and his influence over the discontented members of the pack was growing. Late one night, Cara was in the library, poring over old records and strategies, when a soft knock on the door startled her. It was Lila, one of the younger warriors who had previously defended Cara against Tomas. "Lila?" Cara asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Lila stepped inside, her expression anxious. "I need to tell you something. It's about Tomas." Cara's heart quickened. "Go on." Lila hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. "He's been meeting with someone outside the pack, one of Calder's wolves." The weight of the revelation hit Cara like a blow. "You're sure?" Lila nodded. "I overheard him talking. He's planning something big. He said Calder promised to make him alpha if he takes you and Lucian out." Cara's stomach churned. Tomas's betrayal was worse than she'd imagined. "Thank you, Lila. You've done the right thing. Stay quiet about this for now, but be ready to act if we need you." Armed with Lila's information, Cara and Lucian devised a plan. Tomas needed to be stopped, but they couldn't afford open conflict within the pack. It would weaken them at a time when unity was paramount. Lucian called a meeting in the clearing near the heart of their territory, summoning the entire pack. Cara stayed close by his side, her instincts on high alert. Tomas arrived with his loyalists, their postures tense and defiant. "You've been conspiring with Calder," Lucian said, his voice like thunder. "Do you deny it?" Tomas sneered. "Calder offers what you can't: strength, leadership. You've led this pack into chaos, Lucian. It's time for a change." The air crackled with tension. Lucian stepped forward, his dominance pressing down on the gathered wolves. "Then challenge me, Tomas. Let's settle this here and now." Tomas hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Lucian's power. But then a howl echoed through the forest. A signal. Calder's wolves burst into the clearing, their ambush timed to coincide with Tomas's rebellion. Chaos erupted. Wolves clashed in a blur of fur and teeth, the forest ringing with snarls and cries. Cara stayed close to Lucian, fighting with a ferocity that shocked even herself. She took down 2 of Calder's wolves, her movements quick and precise, her training paying off in spades. Lucian faced Tomas, their battle brutal and unrelenting. Despite Tomas's underhanded tactics, Lucian's strength and experience won out. He pinned Tomas to the ground, his teeth bared in a deadly snarl. "You've betrayed your pack," Lucian growled. "You've endangered everyone under my protection. You don't deserve mercy." Tomas's eyes widened in fear. "Please." "I was only—" Lucian silenced him with a swift, decisive bite, ending the traitor's life. Around them, Calder's wolves began to retreat, their ambush thwarted. The aftermath of the battle was somber. The pack gathered to mourn their losses and to reflect on the betrayal that had nearly torn them apart. Lucian addressed them, his voice firm but filled with resolve. "We are stronger because we are united," he said. "Tomas's actions were a betrayal, but they won't define us. Together, we'll rebuild. We'll face whatever comes next." Cara stood beside him, her presence a reminder of the strength they had found in each other. The pack's murmurs of agreement were hesitant at first, but they grew louder, more confident. Later that night, as Kara and Lucian sat together in their chambers, the weight of the day finally caught up with them. Cara leaned against Lucian, her head resting on his shoulder. "We made it through," she said softly. Lucian kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "Because of you. You keep me grounded, Cara. I couldn't do this without you." She smiled, her heart swelling with love. "We're a team, remember?" As they held each other, the pack outside began to heal, the bonds of trust and loyalty reforged in the crucible of adversity. Together, they prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, their love and unity stronger than ever. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means a lot and helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.